So if I'm looking to buy a house and I'm doing the walkthrough of the property, let's say this house has a basement, so I get a good look at the foundation. What are some of the red flags? What are some of the things I absolutely need to be on the lookout for?
The things to keep an eye out for are, first of all, cracks in walls. And when I say walls, most of the time I mean interior walls. And then after that, you look for slopes and cracks in the floor and maybe doors and windows that are out of square. There's a bunch of things to look for, but those are the main ones. Those are the ones that people recognize.
Or is there anything that people need to be on the lookout for there when they're looking at a property? What kind of evaluation can you do on the soil or the state of the soil or erosion, that kind of thing?
Soil is very complicated. The average person is not going to be able to really analyze or understand. That's why we have geotechnical engineers. If you're in a very clay area and you see the soil and it's all cracked up, and dried out, well, that's an indication you've got clays, because that's the clay shrinking up when they dry out.
A lot of people get freaked out whenever they see a crack in the basement or a crack in the foundation. I think foundation problems are legendary for being expensive to fix.
Yeah.
Are there any rules of thumb?
You really shouldn't call a foundation repair contractor to get your questions answered, because what you're going to get is a sales pitch.
And for people who already own a house or they own rental properties, is there anything they can do that's preventative to try to get ahead of
Yes.
some of these problems?
First of all, you need to understand what it's been like in your area for the last couple 100,000 years. And really, for that, you need to talk to a good geotech. So if you're a really good agent, you can carve out a niche for yourself and be very proactive and get to, maybe get a reputation as, hey, we're the guys with the connections that know how to solve these problems, right? Blah, blah, blah. And now you've got a little farm going for yourself, right? So that's what I would suggest in terms of preventative stuff.
This is the Money Seed Podcast, where we discuss all things investing, plain and simple, the way it should be. Please remember, this show is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not intended to be investment advice. Welcome back to the Money Seed Podcast. My guest today is Bob Brown. Bob is an author, a foundation expert, and is also known as the Dirt Whisperer. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Bob, that's a very strange nickname, the Dirt Whisperer.
Yeah.
How did you get it?
Well, in the foundation business, and I also owned a foundation, a forensic engineering company, and most of the problems, I would say 90% of the problems with foundations, maybe more, maybe 95, have to do with the soil and understanding what's going on with it. And we can talk about soil. There's a lot of myths with it, and there's a lot of myths about everything, and we can talk about a bunch of those. We'll never have time to get it all in, but we can talk about them.
Cool. All right. So your background is in finance, your background is in architecture. How did you end up being an expert in foundations?
That's kind of a weird path, but while I was in college, I did concrete repairs. That's how I got through college. My choice was, well, I'd go work at the bookstore at like $5 an hour, or what I did instead is I had a little pickup truck and I would drive around and look at shopping centers with broken planter curbs, and I'd call them up and say, hey, for $300, I'll fix your planter curb. And then I'd go to Home Depot and buy the bags of cement and some forms and finish it. And, made me about 10 times, $5 an hour. That was a better deal, So eventually, concrete repair, goes to mud jacking, and pretty soon, manufacturers are calling me saying, hey, would you like to be our representative in an area? Would you like to be our contractor, our exclusive contractor? And I'm thinking, well, yeah, why not? That sounds like a good idea. So I kind of ended up I was always looking for good niches, with my background, especially in marketing and things. I was always trying to see, okay, what is it that people need, and kind of what do I have talents that could intersect with that? And it just kind of led me to innovative things and eventually to foundation repair.
So if I'm looking to buy a house and I'm doing the walkthrough of the property, let's say this house has a basement, so I get a good look at the foundation. What are some of the red flags? What are some of the things I absolutely need to be on the lookout for?
Well, okay, that's a great question. Easily answered. So the things to keep an eye out for are, first of all, cracks in walls. And when I say walls, most of the time I mean interior walls. Although, if you have a brick or block house, they'll show up pretty readily on the outside, but not if you have siding or stucco. It's a little harder with stucco. Siding is almost impossible to see anything on the outside. And then after that, you look for slopes and cracks in the floor and maybe doors and windows that are out of square. And by out of square, I mean like if you've got a door and on one side it's got an inch gap and on the other side it's pinched, okay? That means either one side's going up or the other side's going down. And the same with windows. You can have a slider with a window and you get right to the end. And if you've got a big gap at the bottom and a pinch at the top or vice versa, your window's out of square. There's a bunch of things to look for, but those are the main ones. Those are the ones that people recognize. Sometimes the experts have more subtle clues, but those are the ones that the average person can see.
Because I would have thought that you would have said actually go down to the basement and actually look at the foundation. But some of these things you're mentioning might be on the first floor or second floor of a house, not necessarily in the foundation, right?
Yeah, well, they're going to manifest themselves in other places. I mean, you can look at a foundation, you can look at a footing. I mean, the footing's like 2 feet under the soil and, a couple feet below the floor slab. I mean, unless you got x-ray vision, you can't see the footing and you probably wouldn't notice much anyway, because it's just, a tiny crack down there manifests itself with a giant crack by the time you get to maybe the second floor, right?
And so when you mentioned that a lot of the problems are caused by the dirt or caused by the soil, or is there anything that people need to be on the lookout for there when they're looking at a property? What kind of evaluation can you do on the soil or the state of the soil or erosion, that kind of thing?
Right. So, first of all, one of the great myths of soil is that it's simple. It's just this brown mass that's below the grade, right? But in fact, soils are very, very complicated. They're deposited in layers, and each of those layers have different density and different mineral contents and different affinities for water. Some expand with water, like expansive clay soil. Some shrink with water when they consolidate. And these layers are not even. Some of them are fat and they shrink down and disappear, and other ones come in and there's rocks, and water moves along these various layers in different ways. And so there's a lot of things going on all at the same time. And so it's important to recognize that soil is very complicated. The average person is not going to be able to really analyze or understand. That's why we have geotechnical engineers. You can look at, if you're in a very clay area and you see the soil and it's all cracked up, and dried out, well, that's an indication you've got clays, because that's the clay shrinking up when they dry out. But that doesn't mean you have clays 10 feet down. That just means you got clays at the surface.
So Bob, a lot of people get freaked out whenever they see a crack in the basement or a crack in the foundation. I think foundation problems are legendary for being expensive to fix.
Yeah.
Are there any rules of thumb, like any kind of a guideline to go by saying, you know what, that kind of problem is $5,000, that kind of problem is 50,000?
There's no way to generalize that way, because first of all, you've got to figure out what the problem is. I mean, it could be heaving, it could be settling, could be a minor, nothing burger, could be, all kinds of problems that need to be addressed. But the one piece of guidance that I can give people is that, and I'm uniquely qualified to opine on this subject, is that you really shouldn't call a foundation repair contractor to get your questions answered. Because what you're going to get is a sales pitch. And I know, because I owned a foundation repair company and I also own a forensic engineering company. And so I know how to do it right, and I know how everybody else does it wrong. And the fact of the matter is, if you call a foundation repair company, they're going to send out a salesman who is on 100% commission. And most of these guys make somewhere between 100 and 300,000 a year. And they're very intelligent, and they're very ego driven, and they're very assertive. And, they say things like, oh yeah, I'm smarter than an engineer. I've been doing this for so many years, blah, blah, blah. And they're very confident and they bowl people over with that BS. And in fact, what they're there to do is sell a job. They're not there to do analysis. So you have real questions like, hey, is this crack? Is it going to get worse? Is it going to keep moving? How bad is it? You have all these questions, what does it mean? And somebody who's getting a paid commission to sell you things is going to answer those questions through the lens of how he can sell you something. Now, that analysis is free. So okay, we'll take it for what it's worth, right? The alternative is to call a forensic geotechnical engineer and pay money. But the way I look at it is, well, if you were really sick, would you pay actual money to go to a doctor, or would you go for free to a pharmaceutical rep and see what he had to give you? That's kind of the same way to look at it, really.
That's a good analogy, actually.
Yeah.
And has the foundation technology changed over the years? I mean, if I'm buying a house that's 10 years old versus 30 versus 60, is there a different technology and are foundations getting better or just pretty much the same?
Oh, I think, there's probably a little bit of everything going on. A lot of foundations nowadays are moving to post-tension slabs. And post-tensioning, I think, is a really cool concept. But a lot of the post-tension designs utilize what they call a uniform thickness. Now, real post-tension has these ribs with, concrete ribs with cables top and bottom that keep it stiff, right? But a lot of times they just pour a big thick slab and put cables in the middle crossing both ways, right in the middle of the thickness of the slab. And it's not as good a system, in my opinion. So now, ever since the 70s, they've used trusses in the attics, and that distributes the weight around to the perimeter. And I think that is generally a good improvement. I think that helps things. It tends to concentrate loads more on the exterior, but you have less problems distributing throughout the middle of the house. And it makes remodeling easier for those who want to do remodeling. And so I don't know. I mean, the standards improve, rebar and concrete's improved, and maybe soil investigation techniques have improved, and standards have improved. But in the end, the home builder is building as cheaply as he can and selling for as much as he can. And a lot of shortcuts wind up shortcutting what really needs to be done properly in difficult soils.
When it comes to selling a property, I'm not a real estate agent, but I believe that there's all kinds of laws around disclosure, etc. Is there anything in particular about foundations that a real estate agent would need to know when they're selling a property?
Well, yeah, there's a whole bunch of them. Matter of fact, I put out a little document called two documents. One called the 15 myths of foundation repairs that relate to real estate, and the other one is the 10 most common mistakes that happen in real estate as they relate to foundations. There's a whole bunch of things, but the first one we already mentioned. The first two, this recognizing that soil is complicated and recognizing that if you want real advice, go to a geotechnical engineer and pay for it. And there's some advantages, and you might end up saving money in the long run. We can talk about that. There's some strategies that maybe a listing agent can keep from getting fired. There's some strategies that a buying agent can do to protect their clients. Like a real simple strategy for the buying agent would be put a clause in there that if the inspectors find something wrong with the foundation, you get an automatic extension to call a professional in. Because what typically they'll do is they'll call a foundation repair contractor and they'll beat it out there in one day and give you maybe some fancy pictures and a small amount of verbiage and says, hey, spend $80,000. And of course, then what happens? The buyer heads for the hills, and then the seller fires the listing agent because he can't ask him to lie. And then he fixes all the little problems so that they're not visible and hires a new listing agent, which is, how you lose your job as a listing agent, right?
How does somebody find a licensed geotechnical engineer? I mean, it seems like it's a very niche area. Are
It
there many of
is.
them around?
It's tough, and I'll tell you why. First of all, most engineers work in infrastructure kind of things, dams, freeways, sewer treatment plants, and distribution networks, and transmission, power, commercial buildings. Very few work comparatively in residential, and then even very few of those do forensics. So what do I mean by forensics? Okay, well, forensics is when you, like, if you go to the police lab and somebody's dead and you're trying to figure out what killed them, you go to the forensics lab, right? Or if you got a lawsuit going on and they bring in the forensic accountants, they're going to dig things up, right? They're going to figure out what happened. Well, that's what a forensic engineer does. They try to figure out on an existing structure what happened. What is the problem? What caused the problem? And I think it's better to call a forensic geotechnical engineer, because structural engineers, I mean, most people call structural engineers, but it's not really, I think, most of the time, not the best thing to do. Now, there's a few good forensic structural engineers. I'll give them credit for that. There's a few good ones around. But if you ask a structural engineer, hey, is this going to get worse? Is it going to keep moving? He's going to say, that's a soil problem, and you need to contact a geotechnical engineer for an answer to that question. And almost none of the houses that we ever look at, I think only 2 in 30 plus years, ever had like real structural deficiency problems. It's all serviceability stuff, and the structural engineer is going to say, yeah, it's structurally sound, but well, how is it for serviceability? Well, it's got some problems. Is that a problem for you? Well, it's just better to call a forensic geotechnical engineer. Now, where do you find those? That's your question. Okay, that's difficult. And I get a lot of people calling me all the time saying, hey, I heard your podcast, I read your book, blah, blah, blah. How can I find one of these guys? And I got so many of those requests that I finally went to my website and listed a directory that people can access for free and go and find forensic engineers. Now, some areas have a lot, like Texas. It's like I listed like 20 in Texas, and some areas like, maybe North Dakota, I've got 1 or 2 or something, and a lot of these guys, I haven't done extensive research on them. I just looked them up and went to their website and seen that they offered residential and that they do forensic work. So what I'm hoping is that people over time will tell me as they interact with these various guys, hey, this guy doesn't really do that or doesn't really offer it, or hey, I found another guy. Okay, cool. Because I've added a few names over the years, and I'm hoping that when I get more time, I can vet more of them. But it's a place to start.
And for people who already own a house or they own rental properties, is there anything they can do that's preventative to try to get ahead of
Yes,
some of these problems?
yes, there is. First of all, you need to understand what the moisture, the annual precipitation, what it's been like in your area for the last couple 100,000 years. And really, for that, you need to talk to a good geotech. So let's just give you some examples. Let's suppose you're in Houston. It's really wet. Okay. It's a wet climate, or maybe, New Orleans or someplace down there, right? Where it rains all the time and the soil's like muddy down to like 300 feet, right? Well, in that case, they build a house, and over time the edges dry out. And if they're clay shrinks, then those edges settle down and you have settlement. Okay. Now let's take the opposite. You're here in Phoenix, Arizona, the dry capital of the world, or for that matter, anywhere kind of in the West that's maybe not right on the coast, right? Well, you have a house that's been sitting on really dry soil for, and the soil's been that way for a couple 100,000 years. Well, your strategy, the problem is different there, and your strategy is different. So there, what happens is you have poor drainage, and water gets underneath the foundation and it accumulates in the middle and causes heave. So the name of the game in drier climates is to get that water away, have good gutters and pipe those gutters good 20 feet away. Don't just let them dump right there at the corner of your house. Get the water away. That's the name of the game in those times. Now, if you're in Houston, it's the opposite. You want to put a soaker around your house with a timer and soak and water it every day. Water your foundation. It's kind of crazy. So you really need to understand the conditions. If I was a real estate agent, in a particular area, what I would do is try to get to know the experts in these areas in my area and get a relationship, maybe take them to lunch, buy them lunch, get to know them. And while you're there, ask them, hey, what's the recommendations for this kind of, part of the town or this part of the state or whatever, right? And then, by the way, if you ever have a problem, then you've got somebody that that you can call and say, hey, come on, take a look at this. I got some issues and I think it could be a problem, right? And then you can be like, if you're a really good agent, you can carve out a niche for yourself and be very proactive and get to, maybe get a reputation as, hey, we're the guys with the connections that know how to solve these problems, right? Blah, blah, blah. And now you've got a little farm going for yourself, right? So that's what I would suggest in terms of preventative stuff. The long answer.
It's amazing. Yeah, no, it's quite fascinating that in some places you want to keep the water away, and in some places you actually want to water the foundation. That's wild.
I know. It's crazy, isn't it? And somebody from Houston moves to Phoenix and they put a soaker around their house, start watering it. Everybody runs out there and pulls their hair. What are you doing? You're crazy. Well, no, that's what you're supposed to do, right? No, not here,
Bob, I believe that you are the author of a book entitled Foundation Repair Secrets. Tell us about that book and some other books you've written, and where can people find it?
Well, okay, so Foundation Repair Secrets, you can find it on Amazon. It was a bestseller at one point. You can find it on my website too. I think there's just a link to Amazon there. But I have written numerous small tracts, but never published them formally. Now I am working on another book, and I have an ebook that I'll be publishing. It's kind of more of a technical thing for home inspectors and engineers. It's not really. I mean, the public can read it if they want. They'll probably be bored, but and that will be coming out probably in the next couple of weeks. My main claim to fame is the Foundation Repair Secrets, and that's the way I like to keep it, at least until I can. I am working on another book, but it's a few years out. I've got a lot of research to do on it, and lots of stuff to go. And it takes a long time. Writing a book is not easy. It takes a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
Absolutely. Well, Bob, I'll put those links into the show notes, and thank you very much for spending time with us today.
Hey, I'm glad to be here.
Hey, thanks for joining us for another episode of the Money Seed Podcast. Please remember to click like and subscribe. It really helps spread the message to other investors, and it helps attract new viewers to the show. We appreciate your support. Thanks very much.